Welcome to Aspen Leading Edge. I'm Patty Roberts from St. Mary's University School of Law, and today's guest is Dean Andrew Perlman. He is the dean at Suffolk University Law School, starting his 10th year this upcoming fall, leading that law school. And in 2024, National Jurist named him as one of the top 20 most influential people in legal education. So welcome, Dean Perlman.
Thank you, Patty. It is a pleasure to join you as always.
Well, I'm delighted to have you on as a guest again. We've talked about the book that you have written with Joseph Glannon, the Civil Procedure course book, on a previous episode. But today I wanted to have you come on and talk more about the future of legal education and law practice and technological innovations that you have been exploring throughout your career in legal education. And Suffolk has really been a forerunner in these topics. So let's start with what you're doing at Suffolk to train your students to utilize legal technologies and to prepare them for artificial intelligence and its impact.
Our work in this area really extends back more than a decade. There's been a lot of attention to technology and the delivery of legal services as of late because of generative AI, but this is something we've been invested in since around 2013, and my predecessor, Dean Camille Nelson, had gotten off the ground our Legal Innovation and Technology Institute, and I had the pleasure of serving as the inaugural director. And we recognized at that time that technology was changing how lawyers go about their work and how legal services would be delivered in the future, and that those trends were going to accelerate in the years to come. And so the goal of the Institute was to really think deeply about what changes we might need to make to help our students be prepared for this changing world. So not long after the Institute's creation, I had proposed to our faculty a new concentration, which is just our name for a major at the law school, in legal innovation and technology. And to be very clear, because I oftentimes find that there is some confusion around this issue when people talk about legal tech, the way that I've heard it described by a real pioneer in the field, Mark Lauritsen, is that there's a difference between the technology of law and the law of technology. And a lot of law schools do the law of technology. And by that, I mean they teach about the law as it relates to technology. Maybe it's cybersecurity law or privacy law or any number of issues of that sort. Technology of law, and what our concentration was designed to address, was how lawyers, no matter their practice setting, could use technology and innovation to deliver legal services better, faster, and cheaper. So we got this concentration off the ground in 2014, and we taught subjects like legal project management and process improvement and automated document assembly and legal design thinking, a whole range of new knowledge and skills that law students really had historically never learned before, but have prepared our students well for a new generation of legal jobs that I think are only going to increase in the future. So that was back in 2014, and we've now graduated a generation of law students who have done some pretty remarkable things with the training that they've received, and we could certainly get into that a little bit. But since then, we've doubled down on this work, and the most primary way in which we've done so is launching a legal innovation and technology lab about 6 years ago under the direction now of David Colarusso and Quentin Stainhouse, who are bringing both their legal backgrounds and computer science backgrounds to think about ways to deliver legal services to the courts and through legal aid offices in a better and more efficient way so that they can more effectively serve the public. So we've partnered with courts and legal aid offices around the country to help them do that work, and we've received grant support from major charitable foundations, and in the process have also involved our students in that work, where they are getting the opportunity to apply what they learn in the classroom in a real-world setting and developing the kind of skills that are going to serve them well no matter what area of law they go into, while making an impact in terms of the public's access to legal services. So I'm monologuing here, but I could go on, but those are just a couple of prominent examples of the ways in which we have been trying to prepare our students for this future of legal services.
Well, you've certainly got a great head start on many of us across the country, although I do see an increasing number of law schools creating this kind of concentration or lab. With the lab that you have, are the students being trained to actually do the coding, or are they coming up with more of the framework for the legal processes, and then you partner with those in computer science who can make these kinds of systems work?
Most of our students who do this work have no coding background and don't really need to learn that much of coding. There are a lot of existing solutions that really only require an ability to navigate software and not so much learn Python coding or something along those lines. And of course, with generative AI, the need to code is probably not going to be as important as it once was. And so our students are able to figure out how to automate a variety of legal documents and legal information without becoming coders. Of course, we also have David and Quentin who do know how to do that kind of work. So no, our students, there's a long story here, but there's been a long-running debate about whether law students need to learn how to code. My view is the answer is no. What I think law students need to be able to do is conceptualize legal services in a different way and understand how to deliver them in ways that the public can more easily access and that drive down the cost of the services that lawyers perform. That's what they're doing. Or put another way, we're teaching them a new kind of issue spotting, whereas we typically teach students to spot issues of torts and contracts and property. I want them to be able to spot when they are delivering a service, how they can deliver it better, faster, and cheaper through the use of technology and innovative methods. They may not be able to build it, they might not be able to code it, but they conceptually understand that there's a better and more efficient way to go about that work.
That's terrific. When they're coming up with these creative solutions, do they surprise you? I mean, you've been doing this work now for a dozen years. I mean, do the students blow you away with their creativity at solving some of these problems?
They really do. They are coming up with solutions I never would have imagined and finding ways to help the courts, legal aid societies, and our existing clinics in ways that I could never have imagined. In fact, we have in addition to the Legal Innovation and Technology Lab and its work, we have something called our Legal Innovation and Technology Fellows. And they are trained in what we call LIT concentration, and then embedded in our traditional clinical programs and helping them reimagine their work. So traditional legal clinics, and then they try to come up with maybe it's an app or maybe the automation of a legal document that helps that clinic reach more members of the public. And it's just incredibly rewarding experience to see what they build and the kind of difference that it makes.
Amazing leveraging of the talent of your students in the field. So given the problems with access to justice and the time-consuming nature of a lot of the things that we do, how wonderful that they're making a difference this way across the country. So for the law schools that didn't start this kind of thing 12 years ago or even 6 years ago, what recommendations would you have for them in how much of this work they should incorporate into their curriculum as we're moving forward?
It's a great question. And it's been heartening to see just how many schools have begun developing labs and programs in this area. As is often said, imitation is the highest form of flattery. And it's great to see that other schools, not necessarily imitating us, but taking the idea and running with it new, different, and original ways that we're not doing, which is just exciting. And so for those schools that really haven't done it yet, I think that there are ways to do it in kind of modestly. We're not talking here about changing an entire law school curriculum, because the reality is there are a lot of faculty who are not interested in doing this. That you talk to individual faculty members, which is what my predecessor Camille did with me. She knew I was interested in this subject. She reached out. She said, "Are you interested in running this?" And I said, "Yes." And then over time, as I kind of proposed the concentration, I discovered there were other faculty members who wanted to be involved, and they became involved. There's just kind of this nice virtuous cycle that develops that starts from something small. So I guess the advice that I would have to fellow legal educators or deans who want to enter this space is that it doesn't need to be an all or nothing. That start small, start with pilots, start with a couple of classes, maybe on legal document automation, which is kind of table stakes for this world, or have a class on generative AI and the law. And you can build from there and see which faculty members are interested in offering it. Maybe you can only find adjuncts and you can get them more involved. So I would say start small, but got to start somewhere, because if anything has been shown over the last couple of years after ChatGPT's release is that we have to take these issues seriously. And if we don't, our students and graduates will be the ones who pay the price.
That's a great transition point. Let's talk about generative AI and first what you see the role that it will take on in the legal industry, and then what we need to do to change legal education so that our graduates are ready.
Yeah, so generative AI, I think, in a nutshell, is going to be the most transformative technology that we have ever seen in the legal industry. More important than anything that has come before it. And if people have not used it in a law-related context, and I mean the most sophisticated tools, the ones that you have to pay for each month, then I think you're really missing out on where all of this is going. There's very little doubt in my mind that lawyering in the future is going to require the use of these tools. We're cautious about it. There are ethics issues, confidentiality issues of various kinds. There's the issue of hallucination. We could get into all of that, but these are issues I think we're going to overcome. And I don't know if it's going to be 5 years or 10 years or maybe 15 years, but certainly within the careers of our current students, they will be expected to use these tools. They will be expected to know how to use them just as much as we expect a lawyer to know how to use email or Microsoft Word, or if you're a litigator, has some familiarity with e-discovery. It's just going to be table stakes. And so if we know that, then we need to get students working on it now and learning the basics. Not because they will necessarily be using ChatGPT in practice, but they will be using generative AI tools before too long. So I do think that given the significance of these changes, it's incumbent on us to really take seriously the education our students receive in generative AI.
So what do you foresee they will be using generative AI for generally in practice? I mean, some artificial intelligence has obviously already been used when you look at document review and other tools that we've been using in e-discovery and other things. But where do you see the most impact will be in the legal industry for which we'll have to prepare our students?
I think there are more use cases than I can possibly imagine right now, not unlike how I could not have anticipated how our students are using technology in our legal innovation and technology lab. It's really hard to anticipate. So I can make a few guesses. I think that almost any kind of legal document that lawyers create in the future, anything that has been created at some point in the past in one form or another, we will start by querying a generative AI tool to create a first draft. And it might go back and forth with us, asking us a variety of questions in almost like a TurboTax-like way, and then create a first draft for us to review. I think that will be true in litigation documents, transactional documents. Of course, we will have to review every word. We'll have to make sure it's accurate. Our names will be on it. We are held accountable for what we produce. But I think the idea that we will be opening up a Word document to a blank screen and starting to type, or opening up an old version of a document, saving it as a new one, and doing a find and replace when creating a new document will seem as antiquated in the future as it would today if a lawyer pulled out a typewriter and started to type. I just don't think we will do it that way anymore. It will be considered too inefficient. So I think almost any kind of document creation will be done through generative AI as a first draft in an initial instance. Legal research of various kinds will be done that way. Summarizing large volumes of documents is perhaps one of the best current use cases. Large set of transactional documents or litigation documents. It's remarkable how well these tools can summarize information and make it more accessible and more efficient to find what you're looking for. There are policy documents that could be inside a firm, inside a legal department, or if you're helping a client work on a variety of policy documents. I found it to be incredibly valuable to think about how you might change a phrase, a clause, what's missing in this document, what else might we want to say is a really great use case. Just helping us draft emails, draft memos. I've gotten access to Microsoft Copilot and the ways in which it's already beginning to understand the way in which we want to communicate. Eventually, it will be able to know, looking at our entire Outlook mail, what our style is, and then be able to draft both emails and responses to emails in the way that it anticipates we would tend to write it. And I think it's going to save us a lot of time going forward. So those are just a few of the cases that I have in mind. And the tools they're not always intuitive. And I think students need to get in the mindset. This goes to the point I raised earlier about issue spotting. They need to be able to spot when these tools will save them time. I'm surprised already when I talk to somebody and they tell me they're working on something, and I say, did you think of asking ChatGPT to do that? And they're like, no. Like, well, you might want to try because it might be really good at that. We could go on and on about it, but I do think there are many use cases and many more that will be uncovered as these tools evolve and advance.
I think you're right. I've only scratched the surface myself, but I have found it very useful in some of the ways that you have indicated. But I also have talked to legal educators who are panicked about the idea of students using generative AI. I mean, it's one thing to train our students to be able to use it when they're out in practice because their colleagues will expect, the clients will expect that they will be using it. But then you have faculty who are worried that students will use it in law school or other higher education settings, and maybe even for admissions documents, for personal statements and things like that. So what are your thoughts on those types of problems that we may encounter?
So some of the concerns, I think, are well-founded. I mean, I think that generative AI should not be the hammer and we see everything as a nail. So I think although there are many use cases and probably many more use cases than people are giving it credit for, there's a limit to how we should use it, both in education and in practice. I am concerned that the next generation of students may become so reliant on these tools that they lose out on their ability to develop the level of sophistication that comes from having to think really deeply about writing a document and creating a narrative and creating an argument. I think there's already some emerging evidence that people who rely on these tools will end up not learning the material quite as well as they otherwise would have. And so there is a real threat to the creation of experts that these tools present. So I don't want to suggest that it's all wonderful future in terms of these tools. I think that there are some serious downsides that relate to legal education. I think we can hold both thoughts simultaneously. We can recognize that the future is going to require the use of these tools, and at the same time recognize that there are some dangers with becoming too reliant on them. And I think that informs the ways in which law schools should incorporate them into the curriculum. I think on the one hand, we need to teach students what these tools can do, how they can be effective, and then we also need to teach them some cautionary tales about why they can't be too reliant on the tools and that they still need to develop the skills that lawyers need, and that will require them to not use generative AI for everything, and that there will be numerous times in their legal education when they should not be allowed to use generative AI. People in general tend to look at this either in black or white. It's either great or horrible. I actually think you can see both sides simultaneously and navigate through it with both thoughts in mind.
So let's talk about admissions in particular. I know that there was at least one law school that made news saying that they would permit students to use generative AI in the creation of their application materials. Any thoughts on that or where that's going and how it can be useful? I know there are others who said maybe not on the applicant side, but on the side of reviewing applications, it could be very useful for us as law schools. So any thoughts there?
Yeah, I do have a few thoughts. First of all, you know that a lot of law schools are struggling with it, have not yet decided how to proceed. And I know this because I'm on an advisory committee for an ABA task force on the law and artificial intelligence, and they conducted a survey of law schools and asked the question about admissions. And the vast majority of law schools have not yet decided how to proceed. So this is something that's on a lot of minds. My own view is that I think we should allow applicants to use generative AI in their personal statements for two reasons. Number one, I believe, as I mentioned before, that lawyers will be using these tools in the future, and you will have to present yourself in the best way possible through your brain, and you're working with generative AI, and it's going to be a collaborative effort. And so if that's the future of lawyering, then why not show what you can do with the tool and the human combined, and how well you can get excellent output. Now, of course, you still have to say what's in it has to be truthful, it has to be accurate, but I don't have a problem with it on that level because it's going to be what lawyers are expected to use going forward. And there's a second and arguably even more important reason why I don't have a problem with it, and it's based in equity. Right now, when people apply to college or law school, students students from underrepresented backgrounds, under-resourced backgrounds, schools that don't have as many counselors to go around are just not getting the kind of help that wealthier, more well-resourced students and applicants have. There's an enormous inequity in the application process to colleges and law schools. I think generative AI has the potential to level that playing field. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that it is a great leveler in that regard. And I think that's a positive. I want applicants to be able to make the best case possible for themselves without it being unduly influenced by the privilege they already have or don't have. And so to the extent that that's true, and I tend to think that it is another argument for why we should allow applicants to use generative AI. But again, with the cautions I noted before, it can't be used across every context. But in this specific situation, I think it can be helpful for those two reasons.
Well, the equity reason certainly is an excellent one to help level the playing field with the use of generative AI in admissions. As far as the legal education curriculum itself, I know that many legal writing programs, ours at St. Mary's included, have incorporated some generative AI with the polishing of drafts or iterative corrections over time so that the students have more feedback over the semester than they could with just their professors providing that feedback. Besides legal writing, what role do you see generative AI playing in the rest of the curriculum as far as, drafts of papers or assessment?
We at Suffolk also, our legal writing program has incorporated some generative AI assignments, both in terms of research and writing, including in an area that the students had already studied, and then to critique what generative AI produces and explaining what it did well and what it didn't do well, and basically a ChatGPT editing exercise, which I think is important because it introduces students to the tools, but at the same time, make sure that students understand what the weaknesses are. So that you're right, that is certainly one very straightforward use case. Another, and we haven't really talked about this so much, is generative AI as a teaching aid, which isn't so much about teaching students how to use generative AI, but helping students learn legal material through generative AI tutors of various kinds. I built a civil procedure AI tutor where students can ask questions of it and was trained on my notes and PowerPoint slides about how I present the material. I think that's going to be fairly common in the future. So it gives students maybe some help in learning material and also how to navigate a Gen AI tool. So I think that could be part of legal education in the future. But also in terms of the curriculum itself, maybe this distinction between learning from AI and learning about AI. In the learning about AI category, I think that there will be certain clinics where students who representing clients will create documents and first drafts from generative AI tools. And I think that will be a useful way for students to understand the practicalities of it. I think there will be certain classes where papers, you are allowed to use generative AI in limited ways, perhaps with footnoting and citations to the ways in which it was used, the prompts that were used. So I do think it's going to appear throughout the curriculum in lots of ways and should appear throughout the curriculum in lots of ways with the limitations that I mentioned before. I wouldn't want to see everything flip over to generative AI because something would be lost. Law schools are going to have to struggle with what that balance is. But at this point, I think there's a lot more that we can and should be doing before we have gone too far in that direction.
Well, and it's interesting that you said you're on the ABA task force that's looking at this generative AI and legal education. Have they come to any conclusions yet, or are you all still in the kind of fact-finding stage and exploring what issues you want to address?
Yeah, there's just a legal education working group within that task force. The task force is looking at generative AI across a number of issues in the legal industry, including legal ethics and the like. So legal education is just one part of it. There's been no conclusion yet. It's right now just trying to find out what law schools are already doing. And that's where this survey came in. And I believe the results of that survey should be out imminently, probably by the time this podcast is released.
Great. Well, I look forward to seeing those results. You've talked a lot about how generative AI might impact or could be beneficial to legal education and how the technology of law is something that we should be thinking about incorporating into our curriculum. What other predictions do you have for the future of legal education in the coming decade? You have been a dean for almost a decade. You have been a legal educator for much longer than that. And there have been a lot of changes. What do you see coming down the pike in the coming 10 years?
Well, I do think AI is certainly going to be a part of it. I think AI, we are going to learn from AI. We will need to learn about AI. But I also think at the same time, for the reasons we were talking about earlier, law schools are going to have to pay attention more than ever on the other skills that lawyers need. Because if it's less about information generation, and machines can do that, then we need to make sure that lawyers have the other skills that clients really prize and the public really benefits from. Strategic thinking, problem solving, negotiation. Not that AI can't do some of that work, probably will at some point, but I think that the public and clients will want human beings in the loop when tackling those kinds of issues. And I think law schools will have to pay even more attention to those skills going forward. So I think that's another part of it. I think that with the increase in distance ed, and as we know, the ABA Council in the section of legal education is looking and has moved more and more in the direction of allowing law schools to offer classes online. I do think that creates some interesting opportunities for law schools, potentially even to work together and consortia and alliances of various kinds to deliver courses that they might not be able to offer themselves. And going back to the question you asked me before about law schools that don't really have much depth in legal innovation technology. Well, maybe they don't have to. Maybe they can partner with schools that do. And maybe their school offers something that my school doesn't, and I would benefit from them. And we can have more course sharing than has traditionally been the case. And I think technology is enabling that. So I think those are some of the areas that I see in the future. And there's one more that I would mention, and that is I am struck by, as I think so many people are, the growing political coarseness in our country. The discourse has become so toxic in many ways, and people having greater and greater difficulty talking across difference, political perspectives of various kinds. People go into their own corners and don't have the ability anymore to sit across from someone who has a meaningfully different perspective and have a civil conversation about it. I actually think law schools have a particular role to play in helping students talk across difference. And we've done a little bit of that, but I think that part of a legal education is going to take on increasing importance in the years ahead. So I would like to think 10 years from now, we see law schools paying even more attention to that kind of training.
Hear, hear. It's very much needed. Well, thank you so much, Steen Perlman, for sharing some of the amazing innovations happening at Suffolk University Law School, and for also discussing with us how generative AI might impact the legal industry and the future of legal education.
My pleasure, Patty. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, if you've enjoyed this conversation, I hope you listen to some of the other guests on Aspen Leading Edge. You can find other podcast episodes at the Aspen Leading Edge podcast page or on your favorite channels for podcasts. Thank you.